Well, hello to you and welcome. I'm Dave Burse, and this is the Interaction Field series of podcasts, and we've got a fantastic one lined up for today. I want to thank you for joining us because you, as our audience, are incredibly special because you are involved in this. We want you to be giving us questions. So if there's anything that we talk about in the session, we want you to ask us questions or make comments. We want the comments to be alive because the conversation is really what makes this. But why this is called the Interaction Field series is because, well, there's a book called The Interaction Field, and it looks at the models of business that are the ones that are going to create success in the future. And let's say hello to the author of that, the fantastic Erich Joachimsthaler. Hello, Erich. How are you doing today?
Hi, very good. How are you? I'm not necessarily fantastic, but thank you so much for the compliments.
I mean, you look fantastic. So
looks are deceiving, you know.
Oh, I see. I bought some potatoes like that last week. They look fantastic, but when you cut into them, terrible in the inside.
There we go. Let's not cut too deeply.
So we've got a fantastic guest on today's show. We've got Denise Lee Yohn, and Denise is amazing. She's had quite a career. You know, she specializes in using branding to help transform companies. Look at how branding can be the thing that can move a company into further success. And I mean, she knows that from practice. She's worked agency side, she's worked client side. She headed up, I think it was Sony's first ever brand department for Sony Electronics. But I know her as a speaker and an author. And I met her a couple of years ago in Montenegro, where the two of us were speaking at a conference, the Spark Me conference in Montenegro. And it's one of my favorite conferences in the whole world. And it was a delight to be able to meet Denise there. And her book as well. So she's written 4 books, I think, and her last book, Fusion, its subhead is what describes it best. It says, how integrating brand and culture powers the world's greatest companies. And I think it's now time to say hello to Denise. Hello, Denise. Welcome.
Hello, Dave and Eric. It's great to be with you this morning.
Hello, Denise.
It's great to have you. And now we are from... we're spanning thousands of miles here. So Denise, you're in California. We got Eric in New York, and I'm in London. So.
We're all in the same country. You are somewhere in an island, right?
Yeah, so a little place that doesn't matter.
A little place in the UK.
Formerly Europe. So Denise, what has your world of work changed much this year? Has the pandemic had an impact on the way you work and the way your clients work?
Oh, not at all. No, I'm just kidding. Right. Yeah, being a keynote speaker and having the ability to, meet in person with people and speak to live audiences, have that taken away from you completely. It, as you know, as both of you know, is really has been really traumatic. And while I've been doing a lot of virtual keynotes, it's just not the same as being with people.
I have a solution for that. I saw this somewhere on a video. You can go on a treadmill and you can use your roller, the roller, your luggage, and you can pretend that you're walking through an airport.
It's crazy. Well, and I've heard of people who or airlines that actually offer flights where you get on the plane, they take off, they kind of circle around the city, and they come back and they land. And people are taking those flights just because they miss air travel. And, at first when I heard that, I thought, oh, that sounds so ridiculous. But now, I was just looking back at some pictures from earlier this year where I had the chance to speak in Bangkok and Valencia and all sorts of great places. And looking at those pictures, and I was like, I'm actually really sad that I don't have that opportunity. So I am eager to get back into the world when it's safe. And until then, just doing lots of virtual keynotes and still writing and doing conversations like this.
Yeah, I think that the reason why you are so prolific in these speeches is because, at least from my point of view, I know you for 20 years, and every few years you come back with some thought and sort of like put it sort of in everyone's face in some ways. And the last book, the previous book, What Great Brands Do, you say like, look, here are some principles, and we all sort of think we know everything better, and then you sort of like lay out those principles and go like, yeah, then it's got a point right there. And for me at least, this last book that Dave just mentioned, that Fusion book, it's sort of like one of those sort of like Denise Lee Yohn books where she says, wait a moment, brand is all about culture. And you need to put those things not as sort of like an afterthought. Culture isn't something that follows the brand strategy. It's actually the way you said it in the book, and it's sort of the visual tells you it's a fusion. It's those two things that come together. So anyway, I love that idea. Can you, just for the reader who hasn't had a chance like me to read and follow you for the years, can you give us sort of like the highlights of that idea, and what are the steps that you recommend or you have sort of like found useful to make that happen, to think of brand as brand not just in terms of a communications exercise or customer experience alone, but sort of like bring that fusion together. So what is sort of like your sort of like highlight on that book?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So brand culture fusion is all about taking your external brand identity and your internal organizational culture and making sure that they are integrated and aligned. And the reason why that's so critical today is because, first of all, culture is such a strong driver of the organization. And without a clear, vital, healthy culture, you are just not going to be a sustainable organization. But if you have a separation, or as you said, a disconnect between the way you operate on the inside and what you're saying on the outside, then you don't have that coherence, you don't have that authenticity. But with it, you have great competitive advantage, you have a more sustainable platform, and you have that integrity and authenticity that I think is so critical to a brand. The way that you achieve brand culture fusion is first to accept it as a leadership responsibility. And you 20 years ago, you wrote the book on brand leadership, that this is brand is not a tactical program. It is an overarching strategy for the organization. And so in the same way, brand culture fusion needs to be a responsibility of the top leaders of the organization. And so there's the foundation of accepting your responsibility for culture building and brand building and integrating the two, and ensuring that you have an overarching purpose, a single purpose, and a single set of core values to guide, align, and drive everything you do as a brand, as a culture. And then the rest of fusion goes into 5 strategies that actually help you operationalize that fusion. But really the idea is that you need to make sure that these two things are integrated and aligned.
And I should say, for anyone, I went through the book on various chapters, and you get some really practical tools to make that happen. So it's like in 5 chapters in particular, where you sort of like say like, look, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. But what's sort of interesting to me is, despite the fact that this idea that this is really what makes brands successful, and I think that you would all believe that that's the case, it doesn't happen that often. I mean, you in your book you have sort of highlighted some very, very famous brands, like Nike, you have Adobe, you have Patagonia, you have Zappos, important these days, and to remember that company, and so it's sort of interesting. So despite the fact that this is such a must do, it's not happening. Why would that be the case?
Yeah, well, I think number one, there's not an understanding that your culture needs to be as differentiated and as unique as your brand. I think that most business leaders kind of settle for this kind of baseline, generic, good culture within the organization, and they aspire to that as much as they can. But really, if you are going to be able to deliver the kinds of customer experiences, the kinds of product services that really differentiate your brand, then your culture needs to be as unique and differentiated as your brand. And so I think a lot of times people just don't understand this idea that if you, for example, want to be known as an innovative brand, you actually have to cultivate a innovative culture in order to support that brand. And I guess maybe that leads to the second reason, is that I think a lot of people don't know how to cultivate culture. They think culture just happens, or they think that culture is about, when we used to go into the office, it used to be about free lunches or parties and perks and things like that, where really culture building is about ensuring that you have clarity about your purpose and your values, and that you're designing your organization to support that culture. You're developing an employee experience that reinforces and interprets that culture, and everything that you do leads to this desired culture and this desired brand that you have. I don't think that people know how to do that, and so that's why I wrote the book, is to say here are, it's not only possible, but it's imperative that you actually take these specific steps to build your culture.
Yeah, and I think what happens is that I would add a third point, is that and I really like this idea that you need to have a differentiated culture to begin with. Because most people say, no, culture is internal and we stand for 1, 2, 3 values, let's say, and let it be done with it. And then the next thing they do is they say, oh, we have a culture program, and they initiate a major culture program. And at least I have seen this in my own world. We do the project, we let it run for a year or two, and then it's sort of like we are done with it. It's almost like we don't have the stamina to stay with the program, to sort of like consistently reinforce sort of the 2 points you made. What makes us differentiating as a culture? And second, so how do we do it? What are the things? Sort of like you sort of like say we got the ping pong tables, and so we are done with it. Nobody uses it anymore, right?
Right.
I mean, that's an example. So I like that a lot. Now here's the wrench I want to throw. Like the wrench I want to throw into the discussion here, because I wrote a book and said in my book, In the Action Fields, I say that all of this is valid and reliable and true for a very hierarchical organization, a very typical organization like Nike or like GE or like ExxonMobil, the famous companies that we all know, like Adobe or Patagonia. But what I wrote about is I said in my book that the world is changing. We are the company is no longer the walls around which our buildings and the people that work there. The new business models, the new companies that are now successful, the top 10 companies, if you will, that have now sort of created value. They aren't really the typical hierarchical organization where you can, as you said, on the top decide this is what we say, this is our unifying purpose, and everybody needs to align along this so that the culture is consistent across the organization. So in my book, I write about this, like the Teslas of the world. I write about Amazon or Alibaba or the Facebooks of the world, if you will, the networks, the platforms, the digital ecosystems. Uber or Airbnb is in a startup world is a little bit. These companies are sort of extraordinarily successful today. They are not hierarchical. They are networks. The employees are oftentimes. They are employees, but there are also a lot of gig workers associated with that. If you think of Apple as an example, I don't know, they have tens of thousands of developers who produce for the App Store software or apps and makes the iPhone very successful. And that's a workforce that Apple almost has that's as important as whatever works inside the Apple headquarters, if you will. And it's so they are managing a network, a platform, a digital ecosystem. On one side, a lot of consumers, and on the other side, developers, and the App Store brings it together. So I looked at those business models, and I'd like to challenge you, Denise, because you're the expert. Because in this world where we live, the building that culture is like exponentially more difficult, because you don't have employees that are even on the same email system or Yammer or internal social network. You as a CEO can give a presentation, and somebody in as part of your value creating network, if you will, or system or platform or ecosystem, there's, I don't know, he's not my CEO. This is Brian Chesky. I am just providing cleaning services to people like me who rent out their flats in New York. I'm part of a different business. So isn't that, and given that these models are so important, isn't that making this whole notion that you developed in your book sort of so much more difficult and requires a very different way of approaching culture and brand?
Absolutely. And so challenge accepted. Although I will say that I think that even that hierarchical model that you talked about no longer works within the organization. I mean, take a look at what's happening, for example, like at Google, where the employees are rising up and saying, hey, these values that we've been talking about are not being executed the way that we understand them, or that we disagree with the way the company is making certain decisions. And so no longer can any leader, whether you are in a kind of more traditional organization or whether you're in one of these platform or ecosystem businesses, you can't afford to think that if you say it, it will happen, when it comes to culture. So I totally agree, it's become a lot more difficult. And I'm glad that you brought up the example of Apple, because I've been thinking a lot about Apple, just in general, but in these last couple of days as I've been preparing for this talk. And I think one thing that's really interesting about Apple is that they have established an ecosystem that's very aligned and very integrated, I would say very simplistically, in two ways. One is that they do have very clear purpose and values, and by having that clarity and making having such a foundation for so many years of that purpose and values, and drawing people into their organization, and I mean in meaning consumers as well as partners as well as employees, through the attraction of what the company stands for and what it's trying to do in the world. I think that they have naturally attracted the kinds of partners and the kinds of people that want to work with them. So that's the first way. But then the second is that they have used certain, levers that they have, as an app store, to implement certain rules and certain procedures, now that they're going to be, I can't even remember what the word is, but, kind of de-identifying consumers as they're using their apps, and ensuring a greater level of privacy. That's just another example of how they have implemented certain rules or certain processes that say, hey, even if you don't naturally align with these values, these are the things that we're going to be implementing, and you either need to get on the bus or we don't want you as a partner. So I think Apple has done a really good job of both kind of, using the carrot kind of in the sense of seducing people, appealing to people, bringing people along with them with this very attractive and powerful purpose and values, but then also using the stick and saying, here are some guidelines, here are some processes, here are some principles that you must
principles, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rules, policies. I love this. What it sort of gets me, and you just sort of push me my thinking. The role of the brand, as we people of my age has been thinking about, is, we build a brand, we create a purpose, we create a clarity about what we stand for, and then we communicate it externally and internally to the employees. And what you just said is that's fundamentally flawed, that idea. The idea is that if you build the strengths of a brand, purpose, a unifying purpose, if you create that clarity, then you attract, it becomes almost like a gravitational pull. You attract a certain kind of people who says, like, I am part of this network. I believe into the values of things. So that's number one thing. So the role of the brand is changing and makes sort of this your number one principle, that unifying purpose, the values, the internal values, the differentiating values, so much more important, but not in terms of better articulation, more clarity, but in sort of this one-way push, but in terms of attracting the right participants, if you will, the right employees, the right ecosystem partners, the right people that are part of your value creation machine or something like that, or system. I love that. It's a lot. I think it's a real powerful thought.
Good. You know, Erich, I've been learning from you for so many years. The fact that I can actually give you a new thought is very gratifying to me.
I think that this is so important. And the second piece is that the second piece that you address is that you say, okay, the typical way we, at least as brand people, have worked on. So we then say to the client, we need to also talk to HR, as part of our branding exercise. HR that have access to the people, and we need to create an employee branding program that sort of helps us to communicate with everyone all the way to the frontline frontline employees. But that's not really now what we are talking about, because right now what you suggested is the new mechanism of managing a company that is not just the organization, that is a lot of partners that are along with it, like let's say the developers at an Apple, is that you need to establish a new set of guidelines, principles. They call them governance. I call it governance in the book. That in order to manage those people, that they are not sort of part of your HR organization. They are part of your business organization, if you will. They're part of your chief of managed as part of the C-level suite. So you need to tap into everyone that for example, you could have a network of innovation that you work with, and that may be the R&D organization that has a network of other innovators around the world that are sort of contributing, and then you need to establish guidelines, rules, if you will, policies in order to manage that, which is sort of goes beyond what we thought about branding. So to that book, here's what you need to do. The number one is you need to read this book. Then you need to probably get in touch with Denise. Then hopefully you will find also my book, the In the Action Field book, if I may.
And buy my book while you're at it. Just get all three at once. Just go to Amazon, all three.
Yeah.
And then what you need to do is digest how this works. And then you need to decide, how do you develop these new tools? You not only need to decide how do you build a brand, not in terms of just a brand to communicate something, but a brand to create that attraction that you said, that pulling in the right participants, the right employees to your organization, that believe in that to begin with, and also maybe suggest some people to not be part of this organization. And then second, you need to look at those 5 chapters on the tools and says sort of like, what are the new tools, the rules, the guidelines, the governance principles to manage, let's say, a much larger ecosystem that like Apple does, and because you're not, and you the role of brand and marketing becomes not one, next step is go to HR. The role of marketing becomes actually probably managing the rest of the C-suite, those people that manage key functions of the organization. At Apple, it probably would be innovation and R&D.
Yeah, it's much more operational, right? It's really getting into the way the organization operates. What are its processes? What are its procedures?
Day to day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so great. I'm very interested in your thoughts of a topic that is sort of in my head, and this is all about the pandemic, obviously, and the change that we see, and because the one thing that sort of bothers me about about the thinking is that you say that you should communicate the culture inside out, but what if the world is changing, like the pandemic we see right now, and every industry is changing so much. Couldn't it be also that whatever you communicate, whatever is your culture, is altogether wrong for the future that we are aspiring to? So how in this world of pandemic, so how do you navigate between being true to the culture that you are, who you are, true to your brand, but also, wiggle yourself into the future, into that, or respond to the the pandemic challenges that we have. So what is your experience, Denise, on?
That's such a great question, and that's why I talk about fusion. That you need to be thinking about both your brand and your culture, really, because to your point, what I'm saying when I say build your brand from the inside out is talking kind of about the integrity and the coherence that you need to have. But to your point, you need to be very market facing and consumer informed or customer informed about what's going on out there and how is the world changing, so that you are able to evolve to keep up with that. And so I think that one of the ways, probably the most important way, again going back to the Apple example, is to have a purpose for your organization that is not tied to any one specific product or service or application or even one market, but rather is a broader purpose that talks more about the impact that you want to have in the world. And that way, when you are working towards that purpose, you have the freedom to have different ambitions within that purpose, so that it's not just we're going to make X product, but to Apple, it was I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I remembered it. Steve Jobs' original ethos is to make a contribution to the world by making tools for the mind that advance humankind. And so when you talk about, I'm creating a company, I'm running a company that is creating tools for the mind that advance humankind, then, you are not stuck or tied to one particular business or business model, even product, but you're actually open to how else do we need to operate? How differently do we need to operate in order to be able to fulfill that?
No, and this comes from the person that have actually created the personal computer industry, or maybe even as we know. And there is no way in the world that if unless you have that kind of a thinking, if you're stuck with a product perspective, you are going to be a computer company for the rest of its days. And the only way he was able back in '97 make the transition into music and iPods and everything else, those tools, was because because of that mindset. So I think that the number one thing for me as an executive would be to say, I need to start thinking on this sort of, how do we define ourselves? What is our purpose? Are we really sort of celebrating ourselves, our existing product, our existing services, and maybe rightly so in some ways, but should we more be, what you said, be looking at the consumer, looking at the market? Because when you think about it, in the car industry, you can think about it. Mobility was important to me when I was 18 years old. I got a car because I wanted to get away from my parents or do things that my parents shouldn't know about. So there was sort of like that liberation and freedom. Motorcycle was it at the age of 16, cars was 18. We could travel countries, go to France, and it was mobility. The car was just the means, and I bought a car for that purpose. And today, the consumer problem is still mobility. In some ways, but there are many different forms of how we enable that. So it's maybe not the car. For my daughter and children, it's actually maybe Uber or some other sort of form of transportation. So I think it's interesting. That's sort of like a very important thing principle to start with, which goes back to the step one in your book, sort of like that unifying purpose. Is it how? So I think it's a really good guideline.
And I'm glad. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say that I have got some great comments here in the comments area. People are clearly loving this conversation. So one of the comments that I thought was quite interesting, and anyone, if you've got comments still, there's still time to get them in here. There's a comment here from Professor Dr. Christopher Morash. He says, how do you overcome silo thinking? when trying to fuse external brand culture and internal company culture? You know, when these are in the hands of different leaders in an organization, what advice would you have for companies that have been around a long time and have created these silos?
Yeah. Well, again, I think that's I have two answers. One is that's why I talk about needing to have your top leaders of your organization championing and believing and accepting and implementing the responsibility for culture and brand building. Yes, you know, at the end of the day, HR might take on a big load of the tactical implementation on your culture building, and marketing may take on a bigger load in the brand building implementation. But as a leader, as a senior leader of your organization, you need to be orchestrating the two so they are integrated and aligned. So that's my first answer. Is just, again, this is something that cannot be delegated to the silos. This needs to be led from the top of the organization. But the other thing I would say is that if you think about and you work on customer experience and then also employee experience, and you use those as the foundations for what you're building, you naturally need to overcome silos in order to deliver a extraordinary customer experience and an extraordinary employee experience. There's no way that you can do that if you're operating in these silos. And so if you start with the experience that you're creating and what is it going to take in order to be able to deliver on that experience, I think the organization comes to the realization very quickly that we can't be looking at these things as separate.
Yeah, I think what happens in technology, like a telco, that what you would do is you would, in the traditional ways, you would say, oh, everybody should have the same, we should unify. So now let's go first to the fixed line business, then we go to the B2B business, then we go to the mobile business, then we go to the entertainment division, and you roll it out. But what you do is that you interpret basically a structure or an idea, a culture from that you decide on the top based on purpose and values, but you basically trying to reinforce it silo by silo, and you actually may actually reinforce silos. That's the old way, and that's wrong. But when you find, again, I think when you, to your point, Dennis, if you go from an experience perspective, then everyone across the silos sort of like has a piece in the pie, and so it becomes sort of a common band and a common sort of like unified culture that helps to break down the business. If you think about mobility, as an example, I was just thinking of cars. Then mobility isn't just solved anymore through cars; it's also through scooters. I was in LA driving with the scooters around all day.
I would love to have seen that, Erich. That you should have taken a selfie. That would have been awesome.
No, you don't. I was following my daughter, and I was standing like that, and she ducked suddenly because of a tree, and I hit the tree.
Oh no!
Was not a good experience anyway. So I don't think on culture, on silos, there is a very tough question, and Professor Dr. Morash sort of like identifies it. So not everything can work. You can have accidents like I did.
Now, there's one of the things that I've found. I've been doing over the last few years. I've been doing lots of these things where companies are wanting to do a cultural transformation exercise. And very often what they start with is, right, what's our company purpose? Your brand pyramid kind of thing. And then what are our values that go with that? And very often what I found is what they end up with at the end of it is that their purpose is something like delivering shareholder value by leveraging real-time data or something like that. And then all their values are the same. It's all transparency, honesty, all of these things. And it becomes so amorphous that they've spent a lot of money in this, and they've put a lot of investment into this, and they go, this is our new the framework for our new culture. And you just know that it will not resonate with any employees, and it will have virtually no impact on how the brand communicates itself. Are there lots of companies that are just wasting their time and misunderstanding the human element of culture?
Well, I'll chime in, and then Eric, I definitely would love to hear your perspective as well. But Dave, absolutely, and I think that to your point, when you create statements and values that are generic, they become meaningless, and so people make up their own stuff, right? And so a couple pointers I would have is, number one, that kind of purpose that you said about building stakeholder value by some sort of data thing. I can't remember it.
So corporate.
It is so corporate. The problem, or the opportunity, I'll say in a more positive way, is that is a very one-sided purpose. And I talk about having an overarching purpose that speaks to all of your stakeholders and speaks to your highest order ambition, so that you don't have this kind of corporate mission statement on the one hand, and then you might have like a brand purpose or a brand essence and another statement, and you might have an employee rallying cry or whatever. A lot of companies have all these different statements, and it's like you need to have one overarching purpose that motivates and aligns and unifies everyone. So that's the first pointer I would give. And the second is the values that you said. Everyone says that they value transparency and integrity and teamwork and respect. And it's like, well, yeah, absolutely. To have a baseline good culture, yes, you need to have those values. But what are your distinct core values? What are the specific values that your organization needs to embrace in order to achieve your specific goals? So again, this is where that brand culture alignment comes into play, that if you want to be, like, as I said, if you want to be an innovative brand, then your cultural values need to reinforce like experimentation and curiosity and learning and fast prototyping and risk taking and celebrating failure, all of those kind of more unique values that then actually mean something to people. And so that becomes not just words on a page, but it actually becomes a driving force for your organization.
Yeah. But I think that kind of like also plays into this question from Shelley here, where she was saying, how do you balance your founding intention of company values, the thing that's important, and your external projection of values or your marketing, which are both things that the CEO controls, with the real values and needs of the people you employ. And I guess a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is companies forgetting about the employees, forgetting about, also here we've got John saying that companies spending too much time listening to themselves and not understanding the values, perceptions, motivations and frustrations of their customers. And it's all coming down to this human aspect that is so easy to go missing, because people think that when you're a company, you have to be corporate. You have to act like a company.
Right. And both of those comments, I think the thing that they have in common is this idea of truly listening and understanding your stakeholders. As a leader of an organization, you can't kind of arbitrarily come up with these ideas for these founding and guiding principles for your organization. You really need to be understanding and listening to your two primary stakeholder groups, your customers and your employees. Now, I will say, and this will tie back to Eric's point about the car companies and mobility, that oftentimes both customers and employees only know what they know today, and so there's that famous quote from Henry Ford that says, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, and he had a vision for the automobile. In the same way, there is some vision, there's some inspiration, there's insight, there's foresight that as a leader you need to bring to your people and say, here's an idea, here's a direction, here's an ambition that we can go after. And that is not only going to allow us as an organization to transform and have greater value and create greater value and have greater impact, but for you as an employee, for you as a customer, this is going to allow you to flourish and for you to actually develop and grow. And so I think that there is this kind of balance of listening and understanding your stakeholders, but then also bringing this kind of vision and insight and really, bringing the two together, I think is important.
Yeah. What 20 years ago, I ran into Mike Tushman at the Harvard Business School, and he did together with Charles O'Reilly at Stanford. They did some work on, they call it the ambidextrous organization. And what you see today is this, and this has become now incredibly popular. It's been always popular, by the way, but now there's a new generation of managers. They all believe that in order to respond to this new digital world, let's say we need to be an ambidextrous organization. We sort of start a venture group. We go to Berlin when you're in Germany. There are more creative people. You work away from headquarters, which may be in Wolfsburg or in Munich or somewhere else. And the traditional organization, let them be. You be ambidextrous. You are both. You're on one side the traditional organization, and on the other side you are the next variation, the new version of things, being ambidextrous. And when I think about this, the conversation about this, those companies who do that, they are basically having their guns, and shooting in their own foot, because from a culture perspective, if you are in the traditional organization, you're obviously not part of the future, because the future is somewhere in Berlin created. So you're missing the entire point of this particular session in some ways. Despite the fact it's so popular. So I think that it sort of like puts a nail, if you will, in the coffin of ambidextrous organizations, because I think that Charles and Mike has sort of it a bit differently, but in the context of the power of people here, your employees, and the power of the other people, namely consumers or customers, that kind of thinking is sort of like reinforcing to what Professor Dr. Morash said, there's the silos, rather than bringing it together into one unified.
Right. And that's why I like in your book, The Interaction Field, you write about the steel company, and I hope I'm saying their name correctly, the Kloeckner company?
Kloeckner, yes.
Yeah, Kloeckner, and CEO Gisbert Ruhl. And what I thought was really interesting about what he did is, he brought in this, I think he acquired a company that was basically an innovation team, but rather than kind of treating them as a skunk works, go off and do your thing and create these brand new things while I'm running the core business over here, he co-located that innovation team at their headquarters. And you have this great quote in your book about kind of bringing the best of both of these cultures together, yes. And kind of this mix of these two things is what enabled them to be so successful. Yes. So I think, to your point, the deliberately, if you want to change your culture, you need to deliberately integrate new values, new thinking, new people in and weave them into the fabric of your organization.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting. Audi Denkwerkstatt is a Volkswagen. Audi is a the premium luxury brand of them. They also have a system, and I had a discussion with one of the executives where they actually they almost gravitate between innovating with new concepts, mobility concepts, and all sorts of concepts that are sort of important in the automotive industry, and on the other side being the agents of change, being teaching, if you will, the traditional part of the organization. So it's sort of like finding a way to not just running a pure ambidextrous organization, that one is innovation for the future, one is the legacy business, but bringing together those two in some ways based on the principles and the tools actually you have written in your book. So anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
and
time,
go ahead.
Sorry, time has absolutely flown. That's 3/4 of an hour we've been chatting here. Can you believe that? I can't believe that. So what we like to do to sort of wrap things up is, Denise, imagine that I don't think it's hard to imagine this, because imagine that somebody who's watching right now and they sort of understand now that actually these things have been separate as far as they're concerned in their organization. Culture and brand have been siloed, they have been separate. What would you give them as a final piece of advice, as the first action that they need to take to get on the journey to being able to bring those two things together to make 1 and 1 equal 3?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of things that I would say, having an overarching purpose, having a single set of core values, having the top leaders of your organization accept their responsibility for this brand cultural fusion. To leave with a very practical suggestion or recommendation, I would say integrate your customer experience and your employee experience. Think about how you can expose your employees to customers and how you can bring your culture to your customers, and in the same way bring this customer understanding and insight and empathy and understanding to your employees, and really design and integrate and align your customer experience and your employee experience.
Brilliant. Well, I am going to thank you very much, Denise. That's been fantastic. Always so lovely to speak to you and to hear what you have to say. Some brilliant stuff there that I think is so important for people to hear. And thank you, Erich, as always. Brilliant questions, fantastic thoughts. And thank you in the audience for tuning in. My goodness, it has been an incredibly international day today. I've had people tuning in from Winnipeg, from Las Vegas, Washington, Germany, Portugal, and we've had someone as well from Bangalore in India. We've had Prince Singh. Now, it's great to have royalty joining us. So Prince, thank you for joining us today. We're honoured with your presence. So if we can get some more royalty, we're going to keep doing more of these shows. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you again, Denise. And we shall be back here very soon with another show. Thank you all very much indeed. Bye.